Alternative Facts, the news media as contributor and victim. I would like to introduce our moderator, Kevin Beggs. He's the chairman of the Lionsgate Television Group, but he's also, as I said in my opening remarks this morning, an absolutely essential and fundamental reason why we're here for this conference today. Kevin?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hello. Thanks so much. Appreciate that, Bob. Thanks for everyone for being here. John, for getting this whole thing going over drinks at the Langham. And our amazing panelists. We could take the whole panel reciting all their accomplishments, but I'm going to try to do it quickly. So to my right, Joel Pollak, Senior Editor-at-Large and in-house counsel at Breitbart News, the co-host of Breitbart News Tonight on SiriusXM, author of several books, including How Trump Won, The Inside Story of a Revolution, frequently appears on cable news shows, including MSNBC, Harvard graduate, University of Cape Town, master's, basically a superstar. And keeping going, on to my right, Jessica, another Harvard grad, magna cum laude, former chief White House correspondent for CNN, and the Emmy and Gracie Award-winning political journalist reporting for CNN, ABC News, and MSNBC. She's the founder of News Not Noise, a fresh voice in media that broadcasts daily news reports on Instagram, and her first novel, Savage News, about reporting while female, is available now. And Brian, hold on, get my order.
First non-superstar.
No. It's so impressive. I'm actually quite humbled to be even on this dais. Harvard BA, Stanford Law, investor and consultant based in LA from 2016 to 2018. He helped lead political coverage at Yahoo News. He also co-hosted and executive produced the Katie Couric podcast. Previously served in a variety of roles at CBS News, including political producer at the Evening News, where he won a DuPont Award for coverage of the 2008 presidential campaign and was nominated for an Emmy. Well done. And Ann Klenk, a graduate of Edinburgh University in Edinburgh State College. Former senior producer and co-executive producer of Hardball with Chris Matthews. She's also worked alongside and produced journalists like Tim Russert, Chuck Todd, Joy-Ann Reid, Steve Kornacki. She's the only woman executive producer in primetime and the only primetime executive producer located in Washington. And last but not least, another superstar, Adam Nagourney. SUNY Purchase, been an LA bureau chief of the New York Times since 2010, previously chief of the national political correspondent from 2002, covering both the 2004 and 2008 presidential elections. And he is almost finished with a new book on the history of the New York Times over the last 50 years. Thank you all for being here. It'll be done by this afternoon. So we all had a chance to, several of us spoke. We've had a virtual email chain going on, and we learned a lot this morning about tribalism and its various definitions. So with this group, who are in the news business, we wanted to kind of drill down into what tribalism means in their field, what they feel about it on both sides of the aisle. So in no particular order, I'll start with Adam. Tribalism in news today. How do you define it? What do you think about it? And is there anything to do about it?
Thank you. And thank you for coming here for this. Let me try to take on that question. I think that, you guys talked about it this morning a bit, I think. Tribalism in politics has existed, forever, right? I rember when I worked for the New York Daily News, the Irish voters and the Italian voters and the Jewish voters and the white, the blah, blah, But what's changed is tribalism in journalism. And I think that the two, I'm not getting into any argument here, the two biggest manifestations of it, obviously, are A, Fox News, and B, MSNBC. I'm not making a evaluative judgment. I just think that's what it is. And that it used to be that people would go to newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times, networks like CBS, NBC, ABC, expecting to get, let's just say, quote-unquote, balanced presentation of what was going on during the day. I think more and more people are going to news outlets like Fox, and to a lesser extent MS, and to a lesser extent CNN, to get news that reinforces their views, right? So if you're a conservative and you think, just to use the obvious example today, that the impeachment proceedings that have been launched by the House Democrats against the president are a farce, you're more likely to hear that from newscasters on Fox. And if you think that this is long overdue and what took Nancy Pelosi so long, et cetera, you're probably going to get more supportive reporting from MS. It is what it is. It's financially driven to some extent. It's just the way people are going off into their corners. I don't necessarily see it changing. I don't think it's completely a good thing. I know that at the Times, there's more and more impatience, I think, particularly on the left, that we're not more of an advocate as opposed to just a reporter. I think there's a real need in society for somebody to just sort of present news in as much as possible in a balanced fashion without a point of view, or at least without a sort of ideological point of view. And we're losing that to some extent, but I do think that organizations like the Times and the LA Times and the Washington Post and the news pages of the Wall Street Journal, I would add, are trying to maintain that. Last point, if we're having this conference in 10 years, will that still be the case? I don't know. I hope so, but I'm not sure.
Jessica?
I second what Adam said, that there is obvious tribalism in some spaces. I think the challenging thing as a journalist is when you're working at one of the organizations that's supposed to be balanced or neutral or perceived that way, is when you run up against it in your own experience. And I don't mean, people always ask me, did you ever come on a story that you weren't allowed to report because your bosses didn't agree with the politics of it? The answer is no. That's not how these organizations work. It's what do you do when you're reporting on the budget? This happened to me more than 6 years ago, and you take a number from the Congressional Budget Office, which is until that point considered bipartisan neutral, and you quote it, and you get called from the leader of one party yelling at you, saying that that's not a fact. And it's from the Congressional Budget Office, right? And now you have to balance what the CBO says with that leader's perceived fact. So I think that the tribalism that we're talking about, where it's very clear, you affiliate with like-minded sources, it's an easier kind of path to explore and engage. And I kind of respect these organizations that are, they say, we report, you decide, but Fox is conservative, and that MS is center-left. So it's already a bit transparent. The challenging thing is when you're working in the balanced, neutral, middle ground, and you have to figure out, how do you stand for what's a fact? And how do you take the heat from both sides, from one side, from the other? How do you defend that? These are really challenging issues to grapple with as a journalist these days. And it's something that we all come up against. I mean, I find I come up against it all the time.
So Joel, on our call, you brought into question mainstream as the mainstream. Or as accepted kind of gospel as a middle. So do you want to opine on that?
Sure. Well, tribalism is everybody who doesn't agree with me. They're all tribal. I have the facts, and everyone else has an opinion. Tribalism is hard to see when you're inside the bubble. And so when the mainstream media describes tribalism, and I'll pick on the New York Times just a little bit because they were describing how conservative media were taking in this whole impeachment debacle and describing Rush Limbaugh or Mark Levin, I can't remember who it was, but one of the conservative talk radio hosts, as trying to build an alternative case, as if the implicit understanding shared by the Times reporters and readers was that this was an attempt, but this couldn't possibly be the real set of facts. This was not reality as we agree it is. It is a tribal reality. This conservative tribe is coming up with their own version of the truth. The truth is, we all do that. We all come up with stories to explain reality to ourselves and sometimes to each other. And I think the illusion that people have often, I think Jessica touched on this a moment ago, is that only the people who declare their biases have them. And I think part of the reason CNN has been a punching bag, not just for people at Trump rallies, but also on the left a little bit, is that CNN basically has a brand of being the one network that features people from all sides, which I think they did with some degree of success a few years ago, but now it's become quite left-wing. And in fact, I often compare MSNBC favorably to CNN just in terms of how they do things, because MSNBC invests a lot in journalists on the ground talking to real people, and CNN invests a lot in panel discussions like this one, which are fun. But when I'm out there in the field in a Republican caucus in Nevada in 2016, I see the Fox camera at the back of the room. I see the CNN camera at the back of the room. And then I see Chris Hayes from MSNBC actually talking to people the way I'm talking to people. And I kind of look over at him and say, okay, well, that's journalism. He's got an opinion. I don't agree with him on anything, but he's actually listening to people. And so I've had some respect for what they're doing, because there's a partisan agenda there, just as there is on Fox and Breitbart and whatever, but there's also a commitment to news gathering. And I think that what the sort of more partisan age of media, the more tribal age, requires of readers is to be more discerning readers, and basically to understand that whenever you get a piece of information, you're also getting it with a perspective.
Got it. Go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say I respectfully disagree with part of what you just said. I've found that it's often the tactic of opinion journalists to say, you know, we're all biased. We're all opinionated. There is no objective truth. There are no facts. At least I'm admitting it. At least that counterpart to my left is admitting it. Whereas, you know, the people in the middle trying to do fair and balanced journalism, or however you want to put it, they're hiding their secret agenda. And I worked in the mainstream media for quite a while. The bias that I experienced the most was, and this was, you know, pretty prevalent, an overcorrection away from the charge that we were liberal. The liberal media charge had been so absorbed by my colleagues that I found if we ever tilted in one direction or the other, and I think we tried not to at all, it was tilting in the direction of giving the benefit of the doubt to conservatives, because we were, you know, eager and willing to lambaste ourselves for being out of touch. You know, we'd internalized the conservative narrative that the elite media is just that, it's elite. And I actually don't accept that. I believe that even if people have their personal opinions, there are, in this country and in other places, journalistic professionals who know the difference between fact and opinion, and that there is such a thing as a real fact that is checkable and verifiable, and you can report on that. And the last point I would say is, to me, fair and balanced are not equivalent. I think it's much more important to be fair than it is to be balanced. That is to say, you know, Democrats say the sky is red, Republicans say the sky is blue, experts disagree. That's a bad story. I think what is a good story is to say Republicans say the sky is blue. Democrats, you know, in contrast to their opposition and nonpartisan experts and others, say the sky is red. And you know, and they're factually wrong about that. I think that does not exhibit bias if you're correcting a factually incorrect statement. So I think I think the purpose of a non-tribalized media is to be always fair, not always necessarily balanced.
Thank you. And there's a lot of hand-wringing. This whole conference came about because of concerns about tribalism and how it's acutely perhaps worse now than it's ever been. But I think you could probably give some perspective on when you think this latest brand of tribalism kind of came into the atmosphere, and also maybe some historical context.
Well, I dismiss the whole thing of tribalism. I've worked in cable since 1988. It's always been narrow vision. I started working at Financial News Network, which was geared to people interested in business. You know, when Roger started Fox News, I used to work for Roger at CNBC. When he started at Fox News, I thought he made a brilliant move. He played Fox News like he played politics. He knew he could get 40%. That was his base. That's what he was going to do. And MSNBC was struggling to compete against Fox News. So I think what they did is kind of get in tune with maybe the tribalism, and our prime time is now like the op-ed page of the Washington Post or the New York Times or USA Today. It is more opinion, but Dayside is all news. All of it is based on truth, and I believe that at MSNBC. I was Chris Matthews' executive producer. I worked with him for 15 years. Just to be fair and balanced, I'll tell you, I produced the McLaughlin Group, so I've worked for Republicans. I started Equal Time with Mary Madeline and Jane Wallace, so I've worked for Republicans and Democrats. I'm a journalist. I've never worked for a politician. But when I produced Hardball, we did college tours with John McCain. We did a college tour with Donald Trump. We invite Republicans on the show all the time, and Chris Matthews, for sure, gives them a fair shake, as long as they're telling the truth. Where I think that Hardball has a problem, is that if you try to spin Chris Matthews, he's been there, he's done that with Tip O'Neill and Jimmy Carter, he worked with them before, you're not going to be able to do that. And I think that on Fox News, you see a lot of Republican politicians lying. The other day on MSNBC, we kept breaking away from Trump because he was standing there telling lies. And when you have a president who has a bully pulpit, who is standing there telling a lie, you have to try to fact check that. CNN did it in real time with the lower third. So I think cable has always been divided. That's why you have the Food Channel, you have Bravo for reality, and you have a lot of different choices where you can go. I like to go to Fox to hear what the others, the other people are saying, my competition. I watch CNN for hurricanes because I think they do better coverage of things like that. I'm going to stick up for cable. I'm going to stick up for cable news because these people work their hearts out every single day. And I don't know what this country would do actually without access to cable news right now. I mean, what would we be watching? You wouldn't be hearing everything the president says and what's going on. That's it.
That's very helpful. Going back to the 2016 election, a number of news outlets kind of got it wrong or were headed down the direction that Hillary was going to win. Were the signs there and people missed them? Or what do you think about it from a journalistic perspective? I'll ask you, Jessica.
Yeah, I didn't cover the 2016 campaign, but a lot of my colleagues did. And they'd call me along the way and say, the Trump rallies feel like Obama. And I'd say, that doesn't, and they're like, the energy, the excitement, people are just like psyched to be here. They can't wait to get in. It's like seeing a celebrity. And I'm like, well, he is a celebrity. Like, I'm just telling you. So I heard that over and over. I think that what happened is it's the same thing that, well, it's not the same, but it's a bit of what happened to the Hillary campaign. They got addicted to data rather than their own eyeballs and their own experience, and the data said X, and therefore Hillary's winning. 538 actually got it closest to right in terms of the polling. So I think that entire campaign was an example of like it's an old way of doing things. It doesn't work anymore. They all jumped on this Trump story so early that I firmly believe that in this case, cable gave him a measure of oxygen that propelled him to the nomination. Were it not for CNN leading the way and the others following because the ratings came, I'm not convinced he would have been the nominee. And then it just led into this cascade of, I think, errors.
So, Brian, is that the new normal? Imagine 4 years from now or 5 years from now, one way or another, there'll be another candidate. Is the way to break through the clutter this kind of, divisive and or, as one of our panelists said this morning, kind of base brain, fear-based activism, if you will, to get people galvanized?
God, I hope not. But I worry that it might be. Lighting yourself on fire is always a good way to get covered. And I think we saw quite a bit of that in the last presidential cycle, and I think the media fell for it too much. I'm a subscriber to the David Axelrod view that voters are always looking for the remedy and not the replica of the previous president. And so I think what may be the pervasive feeling right now is exhaustion with the kind of base first, outrage stoking Trump style. People may be looking for the opposite of that. Or they might not. You have candidates on the Democratic side who are of both styles, and I should just disclose for the benefit of this group that I'm not a journalist anymore, and I'm advising my old friend Pete Buttigieg. So I put my bias out there, but I think that it's going to be up to the viewers. Americans will often say in focus groups, and I've attended a hell of a lot of them, gosh, I hate all the partisanship, the finger pointing, the negativity, the attacks. Why don't we just focus on substance and policy? But what do they actually reward? What do they watch? What do they vote for? It's very unfashionable to blame the voters. And again, I'm just speaking for myself here. But I think the ultimate responsibility lies with the American people to determine what kind of leadership they really want.
So Joel, Ann touched on in an earlier, I think Mark Sanford mentioned just the business side of cable and print media and online media. You're running a business, or you're part of Breitbart. You know, these kind of divisive tribal fires are good for ratings. They're profitable. Fox is always #1. They're making a fortune. Where do you put that in the context of the political landscape and what the obligations are for journalists?
Well, in terms of our business model, I mean, straight news is actually the best way to go if you just report something. Because the audience for Breitbart or the audience for Huffington Post, like a HuffPost, basically knows how they feel about things. These are, by now, media constituencies that have fairly defined feelings and views about the world, and so you just do straight news. Social media is a little bit different because there's competition on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and so forth, so media outlets can get snarky, including the mainstream ones. They have a little more fun there, and people bat those things around. But essentially, what we've found is that if you present opinion to people, they're not interested in it. You can't sell someone an opinion because they already have one. So what do you provide? You provide facts. And so you have this interesting situation, and I, again, used MSNBC, but the model, and here I want to just make it clear, I'm not saying that objectivity doesn't exist. It's an idea. But what we strive for is accuracy, which is different than objectivity. When you're objective, you're trying to say, well, I've covered all the sides. When you're accurate, your primary focus is, did I get the facts right? You have a side. MSNBC has a side, we have a side. But we strive for accuracy because you will fail as a journalist if you are reporting things incorrectly, and also because you have a side, you're kind of letting the side down if you report something that's wrong. I think that the running narrative, for example, on MSNBC about the Russia story was a big problem, not just because it didn't work out politically, but because the ratings went down when it didn't work out politically. You have to give people facts, and I think people do strive to do that. Don't always succeed, but in terms of our business model, getting the facts right, of course, the way the networks differ is in the kinds of stories we choose to focus on. Everybody has limited resources, so you focus on the things that your audience is most interested in. So we invest a lot of reporting in the border, and we did so well before Trump. I mean, we were the outlet that broke the story in 2014 of the surge of unaccompanied minors across the border being warehoused essentially in Border Patrol facilities. And that was a story the media did pick up on a little bit, but it was dropped. You know, there wasn't this sort of kids in cages idea or whatever, even though that's actually what was happening. But we were the ones who broke that story first because we have invested in border coverage, and we have people who go into Mexico. We have sources in Mexican law enforcement. We've provided better coverage of what's happening in Mexico than many Mexican news outlets. And so that's something also of interest to a conservative audience because people want border security. They're concerned about immigration and illegal immigration. And so people are interested in what's going on at the border. So we focus on that more than other things. But there could be other sites that focus on other issues more than we have resources to devote to. So it's often in the choice of what is news rather than in how you report news. That's the difference.
Got it. Adam, Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow, journalists, maybe. Are they more op-ed people at this point? Maybe not going back 10 years or more.
They're more opinion people than journalists, in my view. I don't really see them going out reporting. I think Sean Hannity in particular, I say both of them are more than willing to express opinions versus news. And I think that when you turn on those shows, whether you're on Fox or MSNBC, that's kind of what you're expecting. They both have a big audience of people who like what they do and how they do it. I would not equate them, in my opinion, to, say, a Maggie Haberman or a Peter Baker at the New York Times or a Dan Balls at the Washington Post or a Ron Brownstein at Atlantic. They're just doing something different. Now, do I think, I guess implicit in your question is, do I think that they add to the sort of polarization / tribalization of the country? Yeah, but that's been going on for 200 years. And so, no, I guess your answer is I think they're, I'm wary of the word journalist, but I think of them less as journalists and more as just sort of opinion opinion people, and that's fine. But again, they serve a different role in my view.
Anne, what do you think?
Well, I think sometimes news can be entertaining. I remember when you talked about Trump and tribalism. I'll give you a pretty good example of tribalism now that I've been thinking about it a little more. When Trump came down the escalator in New York to announce he was going to run for president, and he came down in his suit with his wife, and he came out and he announced, and he made his announcement. And I was on the phone with my colleagues for a conference call, and they were like, they're all in New York. And they're saying, can you believe this guy? Can you believe this guy's really running for president? I mean, who is he? I mean, this is Donald Trump. We cover him in New York. We've known him for... I said, I kind of think he might have a chance. And they're like, Ann, why do you think that? I said, I've watched every season of The Apprentice. That's why. I watch reality shows. My family's also from Erie, Pennsylvania. And that's a Democratic stronghold until... Hillary and until the election. And my brother and my entire family voted for Donald Trump. So my point is the people in New York were really blindsided because they were used to Donald Trump from Trump Tower and everything with the tabloids and everything in New York, but they didn't see what people in Erie, Pennsylvania and maybe Iowa saw, which was a strong leader, business leader, a very wealthy man, well-spoken, and I'll tell you one thing, he knows television. And so politics can be entertaining. We did college tours that were very entertaining. John McCain could be entertaining. But news is serious business. What's going on right now with Nancy Pelosi, someone called her a stable genius today, is very serious. And it bothers me when I watch television news kind of laughing about this and making light of this impeachment investigation.
So Brian, you're advising Pete Buttigieg. Is there a chance for a kind of consensus building, I won't say dove, but a little less strident than our current White House occupant, to make it in this political cycle, in this tribalistic kind of environment? Can somebody cut through who's more of a bridge builder and less of a divider? And if so, tell us how.
Well, that's what we believe. And
hopefully he's paying you to do that too.
I should say again, I'm speaking for myself, not the candidate or the campaign. But I think if Democrats are real when they say that they want the opposite of Donald Trump, not just the liberal equivalent of Donald Trump, but the opposite of Donald Trump, that means a uniter. That means somebody who can bring disparate groups of people together to accomplish big things. And if you look at the history of the country, big progressive goals have only gotten done when you had a leader who could reach beyond the base of one party or the other. And I say one party or the other because progressive goals have not only been accomplishments of the Democratic Party in the past, but also the Republican Party. That's who he is. He's not going to run as somebody he's not. He's not going to pretend to be, a kind of Donald Trump light of some kind. And we'll see how it goes. The reception thus far has been very positive, so we're encouraged.
Got it. So Joel, the 2018 midterms, there was probably never more news coverage than I've ever watched than 2016 to 2018 in terms of anticipation and the midterms and what's the reaction from the left, what's going to happen. How do you break down the results of the House going back? What tribe was being spoken to, or was it something different?
That's a great question. So in terms of how different tribes, if we can use that term, view the news and the country, to borrow a description from the Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams, we are watching one screen, but there are two movies playing. And some of us are seeing the comedy, and some of us are seeing the horror show. I happen to think impeachment is hilarious. I think it's very funny. I was laughing a lot the day Pelosi came out. I just couldn't stop laughing, actually, because I thought this is so funny. This is actually genuinely humorous. But some people think it's very serious, and I understand why. I also think the consequences could be serious, but I think there's a lot of humor to it. The day I knew the Democrats were going to win the 2018 midterm elections was the day of the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. And the reason that I knew they were going to win was the movie that they had been playing had not been convincing to anybody, I don't think, until that point. From the time Trump got elected, there was this, Hitlerian horror show, Triumph of the Will, sort of like a bad Leni Riefenstahl remake going on in parts of the media and in the Democratic Party. And here was a guy who grew the economy, was making peace with North Korea, was making outreach to allies in the Middle East, building coalitions, tweeting some things that offended people, but he was basically a successful president, and a lot of this stuff was nonsense, and you could always point to how silly all this was. And I still think a lot of that is nonsense, but I think it became very convincing when this person came into a synagogue who hated Trump, but hated Jews and hated immigrants and so forth, and opened fire with the weapon he should never have had, but killed all these people right before an election. It suddenly dawned on me that this is now their movie. This is their movie now for the next 2 weeks, because the media are going to wonder why this happens, what the origins of this person's ideas are. There are very few people who remember the baseball shooting in 2017. Guy watched a little too much left-wing cable news. I'm not saying that was the cause, but people don't connect those dots in the same way. Okay, but this was their movie, and I knew, well, that's the movie. And in fact, afterwards, Nate Silver, I can't remember where he said this, but he was doing, this was recently on NBC somewhere. He was talking about polling going into the 2018 election. He said that the gun issue was the #1 issue for Democrats at the polls that year. I didn't know that at the time, but it made complete sense to me when he looked back at that, because I thought, yes, that tribe, in a sense, took over the theater. And I think the danger of the impeachment, I think it's very serious for the country that we're actually thinking about doing something like this, but I think the danger is that Democrats have started the movie without the script. And that's why I'm laughing, because it's going to be funny for people from my political perspective. And I'm not very good at political predictions, and you can all come and laugh at me after 2020 if I'm wrong, but I feel almost like the 2020 election was decided this week. I think that doing what they did before they had the transcript or readout or whatever, now is it really the transcript? What words are missing? Whatever. I think going into it with this whistleblower complaint before they had the evidence was such a colossal mistake that you will never get the other half of the country to see things the way Democrats want to see them. And you need more, you need more than 51% to remove the president from office. This is very easily going to be spun in the opposite direction. And now it's our movie for a while, actually. The movie is, these people are sore losers who can't accept the result of the Democratic election, and this is what and it's now Trump's tweet storm. It's in everybody's head right now on the right. Witch hunt, presidential harassment, this is crazy, crazy time. So for me, it's very funny. I understand it's not for everybody, but the mistake I think that political parties make as a matter of strategy is to do things that reinforce the movie on the other side. Trump does bad things strategically in that sense as well. We do have to look beyond the tribes and sort of think about all this, where all this is going. And maybe there'll be a moment where everything calms down and people kind of connect again. The thought I always go to in my mind is the Dodgers game on Father's Day. I took my son to the Dodgers game. And, obviously there are two tribes on the field. There's the Dodgers fans and Cubs fans, and I'm Cubs fans and my kids like the Dodgers, so we have a little fault line going through my house. But, nobody talks about politics. It's just a completely politics-free zone, and I don't know if the person sitting next to me is a Democrat or Republican, and we rib each other when the Dodgers or the Cubs do something good or bad, and we just kind of get over it. And I know I'm going a little long here, but I do have a show on Sirius XM. And Sirius XM does something very interesting, which is when you watch a football game, like if you watch the Packers and the Eagles last night, you can listen either to the home call of the Packers or you can listen to the home call of the Eagles. And they'll give you their perspective, their side's perspective. The announcers will get very excited on the Packers side when their team scores and vice versa on the other side. And they'll disagree over what the refs have said in a particular situation and that sort of thing. But in the end, they're going to tell you what happened. You're not going to get away with saying a touchdown didn't happen if it happened. If the ball missed the uprights, they're not going to tell you the field goal was good. I mean, in the end, you come back to the facts. And I think people are quite satisfied with this arrangement. Now, I used this analogy once before, and one of my friends got very offended that I was reducing politics to sports. But I think that would actually be entirely healthy if we started thinking about politics more in that way, because we would realize there is a lightheartedness to this. We are actually all Americans. We're not going to kill each other, hopefully. And we just have a different perspective on things. But in the end, the ball either goes through the uprights or it doesn't, and we play again another day. You know, what I try to say to my friends on the left is, I'm not afraid of Republicans losing power. That's not what bothers me. It's not what keeps me up at night. What I'm afraid of is that people are going to change the rules of the game. And I think what's wrong with this Democratic presidential field, and here's, okay, political bias, feel free to jump in on me right now, is so many of them are running on changing the rules. If Trump were so terrible, it ought to be fine to nominate a middle-of-the-road, consensus, experienced, very nice-looking, whatever candidate who's basically, as you say, you know, the remedy for all this chaos. They're all offering more chaos. So,
All right.
there you
I
go.
hear you. Jessica, respond.
So, well, okay. Let me say this. I think when we're talking about tribalism, a lot of us focus on the 80% who've decided. 35 to 40 who are firmly in Trump's camp, 40 to 45 who are firmly opposed. But if you talk to people who are running for office and the campaigns, they're focused on the 15 to 20% in the middle, who they're not in the middle, but they haven't decided, or they're swing voters, they're up for grabs. And one of the realities you encounter with this group of people is that they are pissed off with the way we talk about all of this. That part of what tribalism has always been there, but I think what's substantively different right now is the tone of our politics, in that because of the collapse of the local newspaper, because of the rise of social media and the way we talk on social media, and because of the way we model political discussion on cable news, we are demonstrating that politics is about battle, taking your sides, and tarring the other side as a bad person. Mm-hmm. And there is something Brian mentioned, there is an incredible amount of outrage fatigue happening right now with a part of this public who thinks, I do focus groups asking, like, how do you engage with the news? What do you think of the news? They cover their ears and say, I can't take it. Or stop screaming at me. Just stop. And what they want is information told clearly. They don't care. If you want to come from the left, tell them, I'm a little bit left, but here's my point of view and here are the facts. Or I'm a little bit right, here's my point of view and here are the facts. They can filter for that. They get it. Mm-hmm. What they loathe is the antipathy, the rage, and the outrage. And I think our volume has been turned up so high at this moment that we're in danger of numbing part of our electorate and failing to turn them out to vote and failing to engage them in our politics. And so what worries me about tribalism is less that we have it, because I think we always do, it's the way we're practicing it and how rageful it is. I would encourage us all to think about ways to just kind of bring more of a civil, it's a fact-based tone to the way we have these conversations.
Got it. Anne, you look anxious. This is your moment.
Yeah, I've had a couple of those in my life. I'm a fellow here, and I proudly teach a course called Producing History. And every week, my students meet actual television producers or reporters, and they explain exactly how we report the news. Because due to this war on the press, I think that Trump is doing a lot of damage, and it's a very dangerous place to be. And as far as your comment about this being funny, no, I think we're producing history. I think you're watching history unfold. I really do value your opinion, and you have every right to your opinion, but I don't think this is funny. I really don't think Nancy Pelosi is funny. I think she's a serious woman who's devoted her life to this country. I think the whistleblower was a government employee. I live outside of Washington, D.C., among a lot of CIA and FBI agents and a lot of bureaucrats. And they're really great people, and they take their jobs very seriously. And I think you'll see more whistleblowers and also people inside this White House who Trump has fired or they've left. Bolton, Rex Tillerson, and others who have been treated poorly after they left. I think you could see more stories come out. I don't know. I don't know. That's my opinion, but I don't think this is funny. And I think, I think you probably said that to get a rise probably out of the audience or out of myself, and you're not going to get it, because I do think this is history in the making. We take our jobs very seriously at NBC News. As you saw, maybe Lester Holt closed the show last night. And as far as the Democrats being all chaotic, I don't think that's Joe Biden or Mayor Pete or Elizabeth Warren. There are a lot of things. They can be fierce and they can be passionate, but I think the word that you used was chaos. I don't think that's an adjective. Do they want change? They might want change. I don't think they want to make and break rules, though. And that's all I have to say. But you have your right to, obviously I have my right, you have your right.
Go ahead.
Pete Buttigieg is running on a proposal to change the structure of the Supreme Court. Joe Biden's running on a proposal to end fossil fuels. This is a guy who ran on clean coal with Obama in 2008. I mean, they're all running not just on change, but structural change. That's Elizabeth Warren. Fundamental change. That's Bernie Sanders. They're all, now Biden's platform is I'm going to return us to normal, but he's been dragged along with the tide. Look, I think it's funny because so much of it has to be contrived. Look, Adam Schiff started the hearing yesterday by reading what he later called a parody of the transcript. He didn't want to read the actual transcript because it's actually quite innocuous, so he created a dialogue between Trump and the Ukrainian president. And when people said, that's not actually what happened, his excuse was, well, I was making a parody. How can you not laugh at that? It's funny. It's funny because he actually tried to be funny. I mean, there's an element of this that is funny. And Nancy Pelosi, I have immense respect for her because, first of all, to come back from losing the House the way she did in 2010 and survive all of that and come back on top and run things the way she has, you have to applaud her, one of the greatest politicians in the history of our country. But to see her today saying that she believes the Russians are in some way involved in the Ukrainian thing, I mean, to a conservative audience at least, that's just the greatest laugh line of all time. Wait, we're back to the Russians now? I thought it was, I mean, it's just funny. It's like there's this catch-all Russia conspiracy, and everything is written to fall into it, no matter how many times they slip on the banana peel. It's just funny over and over again. There is an element of humor to it. It is
You know,
pretty
you
funny.
might ask people at Eastern Ukraine whether the Russians are involved.
Oh, come on.
But I would just jump in and say, you know, beyond debating what's funny and what's not funny, I agree with Ann. I think that the stakes are deadly serious. I think that, you know, our system, as chaotic and imperfect as it is, has led to a lot of progress since this country's founding. And I think for the first time in our lifetimes, the ability of our system to meet the challenges of our time, to work with one another, which is essential in a representative government, is in jeopardy. And it's in jeopardy because of this thing that we're talking about called tribalism. Mm-hmm. And to me, tribalism means tribe trumps facts, pun intended. Mm-hmm. It means tribe uber alles. And that historically has not been the way our government has worked. We've had our differences, but we've been able to cooperate when the times demanded it. We've been able to, you know, fight during the day and get together at night. We've been able to do all sorts of things across lines of partisanship, ethnicity, region, class, et cetera. And now that's all in question because we're living through a time in which, you know, identity has become the thing that should define us rather than, you know, what we believe or what we're proposing. And, you know, I would just submit that this is a dangerous path where we sort of say, you know, to quote my friend Mike Murphy, I'm right and you're evil. And I think that's where our politics is headed. And, you know, I think we have a responsibility to try to make a U-turn.
So that's a great segue. So Adam, and I'll ask all of you, 2020 predictions, and also what is the remedy? Is there a way to come back from the precipice of where we are with tribalism that's threatening democracy itself, or not?
In terms of predictions, I've had a lifelong aversion to making predictions in campaigns. I think you let voters decide. I broke that once in 2016, and I won't make that same mistake again. I will, just sitting back for 1 second, and I don't mean to pile on here. In politics, I try to avoid comparing races to sports. I mean, my colleagues do it all the time, or movies. I do think there's two films going on here right now, and I don't think any of us on stage know which one is going to play out. One is the movie, I mean, I guess if I don't want to misquote you, but the movie of the absurdity of the Democrats launching this impeachment investigation. But the other movie for Democrats, for another big chunk of the country, is the movie of a president appearing to ask a foreign leader to investigate his political foe. And I do think people are going to perceive that way, and I don't think you know or I know how this is going to end up in the end in terms of the race, except for the fact that it's going to increase the feelings of tribalism in this country. And I understand what you're saying in terms of, almost a rhetorical device, but I agree with Ann. I think we're in a deadly serious time right now, and I think that one of the problems of this era that we live in is that there's so much stuff all the time, and there's all this tweeting and people screaming at each other that we lose sight of what's important and what's not. And the fact of the matter is, this will be the third time in our history that the House has voted on the impeachment of a president. And I just think that's really, really, really serious. Now, we can argue about whether or not it's frivolous or not. Fine. I mean, people are going to disagree on that. But I just think this is a really deadly time that we're living through. And it worries me.
Ann? Predictions and remedies?
I agree with Adam. I don't like to make predictions. I think if Biden can make it through, that he could give Trump a run for his money, because I go back to Pennsylvania, I go back to Erie. My family is more apt to vote for Joe Biden because they're union family, factory family, than Elizabeth Warren. So they might go back and vote for Trump. I think Joe Biden, I often compare him, and Adam knows this. I mean, we have lived through so much frenzy, so much news, so much everything. I mean, my blood pressure has gone up a couple just sitting here doing this. And it's like Joe Biden's like, just sit down, Ann. Just sit down, honey. Now, have a glass of Jameson. We're going to sit there. We're going to talk, and everything's going to be okay, because I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. It's going to be nice and quiet. And he's like Uncle Joe. And I think that maybe that's what the country needs, just someone who will restore Obama's legacy, which has been taken apart by this president, and also give us a soothing moment, and perhaps bringing a woman vice president into the White House, Elizabeth Warren, who could eventually, I would love to see a woman, either side, Republican or Democrat, be elected president of the United States during my lifetime, which is about that much longer. So that's it.
You can hang on, Ann. It's coming.
In there.
Jessica? Remedies, predictions?
I think there's a good chance that should impeachment extend for a while, that they've effectively frozen the Democratic race where it is. And so the front runners now will be the main contenders, and Democrats will choose among them. I think that there's also, it was only 3 weeks ago that the president altered a hurricane map with a Sharpie, and we've all kind of forgotten about it because so much has happened in the interim. And so it's really impossible to predict right now what voters are going to be deciding on come Election Day. I think that there is so much noise in the landscape. People are so turned off. The people who are going to decide the election in the 3 key states, right, for Democrats at least, are so turned off and checked out right now that they're going to dial in at a time that is, I think, going to be very loud and full of lots of outrage and fury. And it's really a question of who can break through and reach that audience. I think we're all going to be watching social media really closely, that Facebook's going to play a huge role in this election, probably more than TV. And, we should take another snapshot in time come October, because it's going to be a radically different world.
Got it. Joel? What's going to happen?
Well, let me look beyond 2020 a little bit. Because to me, what's most interesting about 2020 is the fact that the Democratic field is so far left. I don't think since Eugene Debs ran in 1912 as a socialist we've ever had this far left of field. And as I said
not
before,
Hubert Humphrey in 1972. That's not left enough for you.
well, it's an interesting year, 1972. So we're either going to see a 1972 where Democrats pick up the pieces after Trump wins and say, how did we allow this to happen and what do we do going forward? And there could be a resurgence of a sort of moderate center. I don't think this is the likelier outcome, but there could be a sort of experiment with Clinton-esque third-way politics, Democratic Leadership Council, which no longer exists, this kind of centrist, free market-oriented Democrat, who I think in other circumstances Pete Buttigieg actually would have fit right in with. But the other possibility is that American voters decide that there's too much chaos, there's too much crazy. We want to sit down with Uncle Joe or whoever, or with Aunt Liz, and just relax. And they decide the guy who's there right now is just too much, and they elect whoever it's going to be. That person is going to lead the most left-wing government in the history of the United States. You know, there's just no comparison between what they're offering now and what Barack Obama offered in 2008. And then people thought that was a little bit out there. But Obama ran in 2008 against an individual mandate in healthcare. Bernie and Liz Warren are running on eliminating private health insurance and replacing it with Medicare. I mean, this is a different kind of debate. So what happens in 2020 is interesting. What happens beyond is even more interesting, because I don't think this is going to be resolved by 2020, one way or the other. Trump can win. I don't think it's going to resolve things inside the Democratic Party. I don't think the moderates inside the Democratic Party have enough steam. I don't think they have enough institutional coherence anymore. They fell apart during the Obama administration. I think that the movement on the left is in that direction of democratic socialism, and I think the most fascinating future candidate to watch is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think she is going to run for president at some stage, and I think she is unbeatable, frankly. Yeah. I think that she has the full toolkit of skills. She has brilliant communication.
So Breitbart of you. Really.
Yeah, really.
She's not the leader of the Democratic Party, but she's a useful foil.
I didn't say she's currently the leader of the Democratic Party. I said the candidate to watch in the future is going to be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's 29 or 30 now. She obviously can't run. But there is a fascination around her, the kind of Trump-like or Obama-like fascination.
Yeah, Trump has a fascination with her, doesn't he?
Well, because he understands that she's a threat. Trump recognizes people who have the same persuasive skills that he does, and she is incredible in that regard. I don't agree with her on pretty much anything, and I think some of her ideas are silly and mockable, but she is so good at communicating them. Let me tell you who I thought was going to win the Democratic primary. I'm going to stick with this just because I think you have to go down with the ship. But I thought Kamala Harris was going to win the Democratic primary for the simple reason that she didn't offend any of the constituencies inside the Democratic Party. And given the kind of tumultuous state of the internal debate, everybody upsets somebody. Warren, for example, I mean, huge crowds on university campuses, but polling at 2% among African American voters in South Carolina. It's just not, she's not there yet. Maybe not ever, I don't know. Kamala Harris has something for everybody, or more importantly, doesn't really offend anybody. She's run a very poor campaign from a technical perspective. I mean, just one example, I was at a rally she held in LA, fantastic attendance, full room, but they set it up so the cameras were all pointed in the wrong direction, and the only person in the shot was Kamala Harris. Obama would never have allowed that. Trump would never have allowed that. They put themselves surrounded by people so that the people at home see that there's people in the background supporting the candidate. Just little things like that over and over again. But I thought that she would win, and regardless, I think that the future of the Democratic Party is going to be in this leftward movement. Politics inside the Democratic Party has become something different from what it is inside the Republican Party. We're not just tribal in terms of our perspectives on, what to do about health care. We are tribal in the sense that we don't agree what politics is anymore. And for many Republicans, politics, especially in the age of Trump, politics is about what gets done. We try to ignore some of the things that are said, some of the Trump tweets, even I've written articles about, I don't like this one or that one. But focus on what gets done. And for Democrats, it's really become about, as Kamala Harris said, who we are. Politics is about who we are. And there's almost like this gaze we have looking back at ourselves what kind of country do we want to see ourselves as being? It's that gaze. It's almost an aesthetic sensibility. And I think that's where Trump is lacking, is somehow connecting to that. He knows TV, which is where he got where he is. And I think when it boils down to what is the problem with Trump, it's that he doesn't have a sense for that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez,
I'm going to cut you off only because we're running
she's the
out
master of that, and that's why I think she's the future.
Okay, thank you. Brian, remedies, this will be the last, and then we'll open it up to questions. Remedies of tribalism in news media, how to address, is there hope?
Well, I think leadership matters. One of the most influential political science books that I've read in the last few years is called Follow the Leader. I highly recommend it. Basically, the book argues that most people, except activists on either side, don't have strongly felt political views. They're not super ideological. And basically, they decide which candidate they're going to support based on that candidate's performance, history, message, and then they adopt the political views, the policy views of that candidate. So that explains the ideological transition, the sharp change from a Republican base that supported free trade and immigration and fiscal responsibility under Mitt Romney to very different positions on those issues under Donald Trump. It's not that all of those voters just had an epiphany and decided, oh, I actually, I've changed my view on trade. It's that, they were tracking the politicians that they decided to support. So I think this election is enormously consequential. I think presidents have an incredible ability to set the tone for the country. I also think that the resurgence in the mainstream media, which we've seen during the Trump years, has been a good thing for our democracy. A few years ago, people were questioning the future of the New York Times and the Washington Post. I'm big believers in those institutions, imperfect though they may be. Adam's not imperfect, but the institution is imperfect. I think maybe one good thing that's come out of this moment has been that people recognize the importance of not just, yackers like us, but reporters who actually dig in and investigate and cultivate sources and report the facts, regardless of, without fear or favor. So I think we got to keep supporting those institutions.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was amazing. We're going to do Q&A now. If you have a question, somebody is going to run to you with a microphone. I don't see any runners, but maybe lunch is catching up with people. Okay, there's several people. Whoever's got the microphone, bring it to someone. Yes, all the way over there.
Right here?
Yes, in the back.
Oh, okay. Hey,
Yeah.
hey everybody. So I can't resist this. Joel, I got a question for you. I want to thank you for coming in. This is what we call an away game often on the conservative side. And my old friend Adam will attest that when he was covering a lot of politics, I would frequently call him up and holler and be very irritating about what I thought was the cultural liberal bias in the New York Times. But I did hear what you said about accuracy in Breitbart. So I went on Breitbart.com right here and I Googled my very favorite phrase, me, Mike Murphy. And under the headline, Pencil Neck Schiff, I found a story from 2017 that at the beginning, the headline is completely accurate. It says, McMaster ally Bill Kristol scheming with Jeb advisor to oust Trump. I only wish we'd been successful. It quotes a blog item from Kristol about a lunch we had at a great Chinese restaurant, or hole in the wall, as your story says, in Culver City called Hughes Szechuan. So fair enough. But then I learned a lot about myself. Apparently, I have been frustrated for years that GOP primary voters have not accepted his elitist establishment candidates like Jeb Bush. True, I worked on Jeb's super PAC and we lost, but I'm not frustrated about that. I got plenty of other things I'm frustrated about. I also reportedly pocketed millions of dollars while blowing through Jeb's PAC. Now, our treasurer, who signs the report and is legally culpable for that, put out a statement saying that was totally inaccurate. The statement was 2 years before your article, easily Googleable in CNN.com, not here. So I'm reading about all my $1 million. I wouldn't be wearing cheap tennis shoes if I'd made millions of dollars on that. Then some stuff about Trump swatting away low-energy candidate. Murphy has shown that he is better at fleecing wealthy candidates That would be Meg Whitman, who did lose. I don't think Meg would say she's fleeced. California's an expensive state, and by the way, it's a Democratic state. But I'm more interested in fleecing candidates. It doesn't mention the 25 winning Republican statewide races in purple, blue, and red states. Getting quoted in legacy media outlets, that does happen. And this is my favorite. Whispering in the ears of establishment media figures like Chuck Todd and dumbing them down. Then winning presidential elections, he hasn't won any. Worked on 2 winning presidential elections. Instead of figuring out what resonates with middle-class Americans, et cetera. Now, look, I would have been happy to correct your reporter who never tried to contact me. This thing was the product of the world's laziest Google search and some purple language that could have come right out of Pravda in the heyday. So my point being, you can claim a lot of things for Breitbart, and you have every right to do what you guys do, but accuracy with this cut and paste stuff, I don't think is true.
Let me ask you something you said this week on MSNBC.
Sure.
You went on MSNBC and you said that there were 30 Republican votes for impeachment in the Senate.
That's not what I said. You're back to your tricks.
No.
I said a
Tell us
Republican.
what you said.
Let me say exactly what I said.
Okay.
Because the transcripts, anybody can download it. Right. I said a Republican senator told me if it was a secret vote, he thought or he or she, I should say to be really accurate, get the guessing game going, thought that
I think everybody knows who it was.
about 30 Republican members of
No
the Senate
prizes.
caucus would vote for impeachment, but it would have to be a secret vote. The key thing being publicly, they're cowed by Trump. So, of course, publicly, nobody other than Sass, who's kind of hinted, and Romney, have said anything. But I never claimed 30. I said secret vote 30. And I quoted somebody who's in the caucus.
So you think it's okay to go on a cable news channel and tell that audience, which is eager for information about how Trump's going to disappear tomorrow, that this really has a real chance of happening if only we can find some way to get these 30 who want. So you quote one source, one senator who says there are 30, no prizes for guessing who that senator is, and you think that it's good for the country to tell them this is just within your grasp. If we can just run this a little longer, we can pull them all out of the closet and this long nightmare will be over and it's like 2016 never happened. Or do you think it might be more interesting to tell those voters what the late Ed Schultz used to say on MSNBC? When I talk to working class families, they don't care about this stuff. They care about trade, they care about immigration, they care about wages, and they care about jobs. So, I mean,
Well,
you can
let me
do that, but if
address
you're gonna talk about being accurate, you're feeding the beast with a story
respond
like
to that, Joe. One, you paraphrased me into a speech. I said something that some people thought was newsworthy. A Republican senator in the caucus, unlike you, unlike me, probably well-sourced, that's interesting information from the inside, I think. You can choose to believe it or not, thought that 30 of his or her colleagues, if it was a secret vote, would lean and vote for impeachment. Now, Jeff Flake just came out a minute ago on the wires and said I was wrong. He thinks 35. And he's another former sitting senator who I think knows that world. But since it's a secret vote, we're never going to know. But do I think that was not useful? No, I think it was well-sourced information from an opinion there inside the Senate, and I was happy I said it, said it again, say it tomorrow.
And Joel, do you think it's not true? I mean, I'm wondering, do you think that whatever the senator was who told Mike that was wrong?
Yeah, I think
Again,
it's not true.
Not true. You base
No,
that
it's not
on?
true.
I mean, I don't know.
No,
I just,
it's not
you know,
true. You're not going to impeach and remove a president for
No,
doing.
he's talking about a secret. It's just a way of
Yeah, it's more about the
gauging the
attitude.
sentiment of the caucus.
No, it's
You're
not
right.
true.
We're never going to have a situation where Republicans are going to vote. I don't think we are going to vote to impeach this guy. But I think Mike.
Well, we know there's one. There'll be one vote for impeachment.
A public vote.
And I think we know who.
But my point is,
Yeah.
Mike can carry his word himself. But my point is, I think Mike was using that as a way to talk about what the real sentiment was within the caucus, and that seems to me legitimate. I mean, unless you disagree, you think it's wrong.
No, I
don't know.
think it's wrong, and I think your source is wrong because I think your source has an axe to grind, and I think I know your source is. I'm not.
What's a
gonna ask
better
you.
number?
Max 3.
Okay, what do you?
Now,
base
you know
that
what?
on?
I want to back
secret
Mike up. Robert Costa in the Washington Post wrote a story and said that the cracks emerge among Senate Republicans over Trump urging leader to investigate. And this is Robert Costa for the Washington Post, who's a damn good reporter. And that story.
I'm actually going to look up that story because this is a good example. I saw that, And
While you're looking,
I saw that. No, I just want to point out this is an example of what I'm talking. I mean,
Where's
feeding
the
the
next
beast.
question?
You're telling people this is just around the corner, and we all
Joel,
see the banana
just-
peel around the corner,
other
and
people
you all
have
are going to
questions.
slip on
Just
it.
really quickly, I'd love to have you just briefly address, why didn't your reporter call me?
Who is the reporter?
Mr. Lee, I didn't see his first name. I'll look it up. It's
Okay.
let's get a microphone over there.
No, I just have to look it
We're
up on
gonna
the
keep
phone.
this
I'll be happy to.
moving.
Tony Lee, 6 August 2017.
I'll send him a note and tell him to call you. You want to comment on the story?
No, it's a dead story now, but
Okay.
next time I think I'm not hard to find.
Okay, good.
Who's got a mic? Take it to that person right there. Thank you.
At the university, we're very concerned about fact and truth. Where does the bias come? It comes from the story being told and how we select the facts. They can be all true or not true, depending on the story. I think the story of Trump starts day one in the Oval Office. Is it a fact or not a fact? The Russians were in the Oval Office without the U.S. media, only with the Russian media. Now, that story doesn't get reported because it doesn't fit somebody's story. It's a fact on video. I saw it. You saw it? It's on video. Why is not that reported in Breitbart, I wonder? Or why not even on MSNBC? Is that too old?
It was reported. That's why you saw it on
but
video.
why not now? Why not now?
That's why you saw it on video, because we reported it and we stated that no reporters were allowed in the room, that the translator was not allowed to share anything, and we wondered, and that I think was the day that Trump
But
slammed
Breitbart didn't
Comey.
report it.
Well, do you see why I find this funny? Because the story has changed from collusion with Russia to collusion with Russia's enemy. So decide which one it is, but they're
It's
both pretty
both.
funny. Oh, that's very interesting.
It's
He's colluding with.
international interference in American democratic politics.
Well, let me ask you this. Barack Obama sent his
It's a
administration.
very interesting two-step. If you notice, Joel never actually responds to the questions he's asked. He always deflects and counterattacks. But anyway.
There's a question. There's the young lady.
It's always
over
fun to come
there.
here.
Bring the microphone.
It's always fun.
Okay, go ahead.
I just can't, I have to say this. The problem with saying that these things are funny is that it undermines people's faith in democracy. It's not
No, it
about,
doesn't. I'm
it's not-
sorry.
wait, I'm sorry. It's not about the right or the left. It's not about the perspective. It's laughing at the institution of government and laughing at these institutions and laughing at these proceedings undermines people's faith.
I'm not laughing at democracy. I'm not laughing at government or the proceedings. I'm laughing at the people who are telling you this stuff. I actually care about democracy. They reject democracy. I believe somebody won the 2016 elections. They do not. I believe impeachment is reserved for what it says the Constitution should be reserved for. They do not. I think the tragedy is that many of the mainstream outlets, including the New York Times and Washington
Okay,
Post
all right,
and so
all right.
forth,
We're gonna wrap it up.
have
Hold on.
sold this
Okay.
conspiracy
Thank you, Joel.
to
Appreciate it. No, it's good. I think we're out of time. Bob's summoning us all off the stage. Come on up, if you will, to end this in a dignified fashion.
I'll debate later with Joel why there's any inconsistency between Russian interference in 2016 and telling Ukraine to investigate the son of the former Vice President of the United States. I don't think there's any inconsistency. But anyway, we will have our last coffee break now, and we'll return in about 10 to 15 minutes. Thanks.